Hello friends, I hope you're well. You're very welcome here as ever. My name is Aisling and today I'm here to talk about books. So today I'm going to do a video that I've been meaning to do for a while, but I've been finding it particularly difficult to actually pick the books on this list. But for now I'm gonna run with what I've got. This is not the definitive list of Irish books, but today I'm going to talk about 10 of my personal favourite Irish books that I feel are representative of the Ireland that I have come to know and love. So for context, I have lived in small town Ireland most of my life, which is within about a half an hour's drive to the coast, but I have spent an awful lot of my time roaming the fields of rural Ireland, especially as a child, because I often stayed with my grandmother who lived in the countryside. And then as a young adult, I spent 4 years studying in Dublin, so I've kind of moved around Ireland a little bit, not too far, but different sectors of the country, I suppose. There will be some authors and novels on this list that you will 100% expect, so those are the ones that I'm actually going to get to first. Any guesses on the first author on the list? You get 0 points or bragging rights because it's probably quite obvious. So this first novel I'm going to mention is by Sally Rooney, of course. And it is quite controversial because I know that it's widely loved and widely loathed, but it's one of my favourite novels of all time, and that is Normal People by Sally Rooney. It hardly needs any introduction. It's also an incredibly popular TV show of the same name. So we follow Marianne and Connell and they meet as teenagers. They're in the same school. So Marianne comes from a very well-to-do family and Connell comes from a different class than Marianne. He lives in a much smaller home just with his mum. She's a single mother, but it's a home full of love, and Marianne's home is quite cold and her family are quite distant. So in school they don't really know each other. Marianne is quite private, keeps to herself, is very quiet, and Connell is really popular, really well adjusted. They don't really know each other inside school, but Connell's mom works in Marianne's family home as their cleaner. So one day Connell goes to pick up his mum from work, and from there on in, himself and Marianne get to know each other, but for some reason their relationship is one that they just keep secret in school. Who knows why. They have a bit of an intense relationship but outside of school, and then later on we follow them as they both end up studying in Trinity College in Dublin, and they have essentially drifted quite a bit from each other, but they keep being drawn back from other opportunities and other people back to each other. There's like this invisible string that keeps pulling them back together. At this point it seems almost as though they've switched roles. Connell doesn't seem to be doing the best, is struggling with making friends, and Marianne is doing really well in that sense. We follow them over the course of a couple of years, and I feel that this novel is a novel that is about how far two people are willing to go to save each other. When I heard the premise of this book, I remember thinking like, no, this is not for me, but this book absolutely devastated me. I mean, devastated me. In the best way possible, of course. It's oftentimes frustrating, with many of their issues being just purely as a result of miscommunication. And I know that this is where a lot of people's opinions on this book divide, because people are like, I'm sick of the miscommunication trope, just talk to each other. Let me tell you, it's incredibly realistic in this book. People are like, that is not realistic. It is very realistic. We're talking contemporary Ireland, where we're coming out of the shadow of Catholic guilt and shame, where people still don't really talk about how they feel, don't communicate very well with each other. This country is in a shambles in terms of emotional maturity sometimes, and this book really portrays that very well. I loved this novel, and you're entitled to your opinion, but if you don't like it, you're wrong. No, really. You get to like what you like. The next two books are by the same author, who I only really discovered in the last maybe year or two. She is incredible. I have seen her speak live twice and she is just so engaging. I was enamored by her, I won't lie. So the next two books I'm going to speak about are by Claire Keegan. So the first one I'm going to mention is this one, Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. So Small Things Like These is a short novel, a novella set in small town Ireland, Fun fact, it's set in my hometown. I think it's done really well. It's set in the 1980s and we follow Bill Furlong, who is a coal man. Bill Furlong is a father of a few daughters and he is married. And I would say that their marriage is quite a distant one, but he's very committed and does all that he can for his family. They don't have a lot of money. They're getting by, and Bill Furlong somehow gets tied up in a little bit of what I could only call an episode of concealed mistreatment maybe. So he struggles to walk away from this, knowing that there's something going on and hoping that there's something that he can do to help, but also knowing that if he gets involved, he's getting involved with the Catholic Church. In the 1980s, that was not something that you would go up against. We briefly touch on the Magdalene laundries in this book. I won't go into detail on that. Ireland has a lot to answer for in its past, and Catholicism has a lot to answer for in Ireland's past. This book isn't all about religion, but a lot of what transpires in it is rooted in the throes of how domineering Catholicism was in Ireland at the time. It's really beautifully written. Claire Keegan writes with really sparse prose, but it's absolutely stunning. She literally does not spare any words. Every word is on point, and this is how she gets these incredible books down to this small size. There was a film of this shot here in March of this year, so it stars Cillian Murphy. Hopefully we'll be seeing that sometime very soon on the big screen. And then the next book by Claire Keegan I have mentioned again and again on this channel. It is Foster. So Foster follows a young girl who's whisked away to stay with some distant relatives that she doesn't really know very well, and we're not really told why she in particular is sent to stay when she has many siblings. So the reason that she's sent to stay away is that her mother is preparing to have another baby and they want a little bit more time and space, I guess, in the home to prepare for that, but she has a lot of siblings that are left at home. So it's strange that she was sent. But anyway, so we see evidence of this young girl coming from a home where she doesn't find the love maybe that she deserves, and in time we can see her receiving that warmth and affection from these relatives. So it's just set over the space of a summer. Again, it's a very short and very quiet novel, but it's set in rural Ireland, so the backdrop is one that's incredibly nostalgic for me. It's also laced throughout with underlying sadness, I will say. I feel like Small Things Like These was similar in that sense. This was one of my favourite books of the year, if not one of my favourite books of all time. Like Small Things Like These, there's already a film adaptation of this book. It's called On Colleen Kewan, or in English, The Quiet Girl. The film is also incredibly beautiful and I would definitely recommend looking that up as well because it's really lovely. The next book then is by our laureate for Irish fiction, who is Colm Tóibín, and the book that I'm going to speak about of his is The Blackwater Lightship. So this is a book that is set in the early 1990s, not too far from where Small Things Like These was set, interestingly enough. So we follow Helen and her mother Lily and then her grandmother Dora, and they're staying in Dora's seaside house with her brother Declan, who is unfortunately dying of AIDS. The sparse prose in this is beautiful and luminous, and he just explores the nature of a family of war with itself so well. There's a scene in particular where Lily speaks about the Blackwater Lightship, which is a lighthouse, and even though it's 3 years since I read this book, it's one that I think of often. This paragraph in particular, I really loved it. Wasn't expecting to, but yeah, it's one that's definitely up there for me. And then there's another author who in a way kind of reminds me of Colm Tóibín. They're quite different as well. He passed away in 2006, so it was John McGahern, and a book that I'm going to talk about is That They May Face the Rising Sun. I'm going to come out straight and say it, this book is not a book that's going to be for everybody. So it's a novel that's set in rural Ireland in a small village on the side of a lake. It's a village that's kind of flirting with modernity but is still really caught up in the trappings of tradition. So what makes this novel come alive is its characters. So there are so many characters in this novel. I remember reading this and thinking, I don't know if this is for me. It was quite slow, but deliberately so. We follow a year in the lives of these characters as we observe their rituals of work and play and of religious observance, again the Catholic Church. The details then of changing seasons and the cycles of birth and death. So it's deceptively simple, and it deals with the workings of human nature as it encounters the terrors and beauty of ordinary life. That's all I can really say about that, because this is definitely a character driven novel, and as I said, it's not going to be for everybody. If it sounds like something that's a bit like too Irish and too pastoral for you, don't read it. It's not going to be for everybody. The next book then is a novel that I read on audio. It just happened to be available on my library audiobook app. I didn't really have any intention of reading it as such. So the novel I'm speaking about is Snowflake by Louise Neelan. So we follow Debbie, who's been raised on her family's dairy farm. She lives with her mother Maeve, so a strange and skittish woman who often takes to bed for days, and she believes in her dreams as prophecies. And Maeve's brother Billy lives in a caravan at the end of the garden, and he has been heavily involved in Debbie's upbringing. So Debbie earns herself a place to study at Trinity College in Dublin. Here, for the first time, she finds herself outside of the sheltered bubble of her life on the farm, and she finds herself not only overwhelmed by city life but also quite disappointed by it. This is a coming of age novel, and it's lightly based in magical realism, and it's both incredibly sad and also incredibly hopeful. I just found that the audiobook for this really brought it to life in such a way that maybe reading it from the page might not have done for me. I really enjoyed it. It's kind of a more contemporary one. People have compared her to Sally Rooney, but I found her very different. I think the comparison was there because they're both young Irish female authors. Regardless, I think it's definitely worth a read and might appeal more to people who hate Sally Rooney. So again, there's another author, and I'm going to speak about two books of theirs. So I'm going to speak about Emily Pine. So the first book I'm going to mention is her book Notes to Self. So this is a collection of personal essays. So Pine really confronts her past, her relationships, and her role in society in an effort to understand herself. She tackles subjects like addiction, fertility, feminism, sexual violence, just with a real and honest intimacy, but also like a really lovely and delicate humour. I just really thought it was great. But the next book of hers is her first novel, and it is Ruth and Pen. Shout out for that lovely yellow cover. So Ruth and Pen is a novel about two very different people. So Ruth and Pen are going about their lives in Dublin on one day. So it's October 7th, 2019, and they don't know each other, but in many ways they're both asking themselves the same questions. So Ruth is a woman, I think she's in her 40s, and she's in a marriage that is essentially in crisis, and she's trying to make a decision about whether to stay or whether to leave. And then Pen, I love Pen, she's an autistic teenager and she really struggles with communication, and she's intent that today of all days the words will flow. So she wants to speak her truth to her best friend Alice and ask for what she desperately wants. This is a novel about the limits of grief and of love, and how to fit in a world that doesn't seem willing or able to make space for you. I just really enjoyed this as well. But as an aside, I know that some critics were really disappointed in this novel, but I say it's great, and that, you know, if it sounds like something up your alley, then you should definitely give it a go. So the next book then is one that in the beginning I genuinely thought was a novel, but it's actually not. So it is called A Ghost in the Throat, and it's written by Deirdre Negri. So this is one that's going to be incredibly divisive. When I finished it myself, I just didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know how I felt about it, but it's definitely one of those ones that has stayed with me over the years. So it's a book of kind of essay and auto-fiction. It's very strange and it's difficult to describe. So it's heavily based upon an epic poem written by an Irish noblewoman in the 1700s. This woman finds her husband murdered and drinks handfuls of his blood, and then composes this poem, Os Gaeilge, or in Irish. So our author in the present day is a young mother struggling in the throes of potential tragedy, and she encounters this poem, like it's a really long epic poem in Irish, and she becomes obsessed with how often that it parallels her own life. She sets out to translate it and to track down the rest of the story. It's truly devastating at times, and it's a really difficult read because it can be quite sad, but also I found it a little bit confusing at times and quite slow. But there's so much in here of worth, so much interjected in here that I absolutely loved. It sits heavily within the theme of motherhood, so if that's something that's not for you, this book definitely will not be for you. Don't take a chance on this book if you feel like it's not for you. It's really original, really different, but it's also a very strange read, and it will not be for everybody. Sometimes I wonder if it was even for me, but it was. It's such a beautifully written book, so I'm going to put that out there as a recommendation. 10th and final recommendation of Irish books that feel truly representative to me of what it's like to live in Ireland as a young woman, particularly as a young sick woman in Ireland. It's this book. It's Constellations, Reflections from Life by Sinead Gleeson. So this is yet another book of personal essays, and this book has sat in my guts since I first read it, genuinely. It follows like a range of themes like art, ways of seeing, grief, ghosts, illness, and asks questions about what it is to be a woman, but not only what it is to be a woman, but also what it is to be a woman in Ireland today. I related so heavily to parts of this book. It just truly broke my heart on a personal level, but also made me feel like incredibly seen, and especially living within a sick body in a wealthy but incredibly flawed country. Last year I was having a conversation with my therapist about what it's like to live in a sick body, and he said to me, oh, there's this book, and with that I actually knew that he was going to recommend Constellations by Sinead Gleeson. It's another one again that's not going to be for everybody, but I feel that it's important and it's really representative of what it's like to be an Irish woman. Definitely holds a lot of merit for me and is 100% worth a read. I'm going to leave you with a quote. I have it written down here somewhere. Okay, so I have come to think of all the metal in my body as artificial stars, glistening beneath the skin, a constellation of old and new metal, a map, a tracing of connections, and a guide to looking at things from different angles. So that's where the name of the book comes from. So pals, that is my list of 10 Irish books that for now I'm going to recommend. I hope you find something in here that maybe you're unaware of, that you have never heard of before, potentially a new favourite in there, and don't come at me about Sally Rooney. I won't hear bad things said about her. With that, I'm going to leave you to it. Thanks so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And look, I hope you're well. I hope you're minding yourself, and I'll talk to you very, very soon. Bye bye.